was first notified, I was in Utah, and the doctor on the phone told me that, as far as he was concerned, there was practically no chance at all. For everyone in the car was killed but her.
For 3 decades, he was the moral compass of America. We saw him as the fiercely loyal little Joe Cartwright on the Ponderosa. We knew him as the compassionate, hard-working Charles Ingalls, building a life on the prairie with nothing but grit and love. He was even an angel sent from God to walk among us. Michael Landon wasn't just a TV star, he was a symbol of family, faith, and doing the right thing. But behind that perfectly crafted image, behind the warm smiles and life lessons, there were always whispers of a different story. A story of deep-seated trauma, of private demons, of a man whose real life was far more complicated, and at times, far more heartbreaking, than any script he ever wrote. For years, it was just speculation. But now, the one person who saw it all, his eldest daughter, has finally broken her silence. And what she reveals confirms the one thing many have suspected all along: the man the world knew was only a fraction of the real story. Michael Landon was more than an actor, he was a television institution. From 1959 to 1989, he was an almost constant presence on NBC, a titan of the small screen who defined an entire era of family entertainment. Through Bonanza, Little House on the Prairie, and Highway to Heaven, he created a persona that was impossible to separate from his characters. He was America's dad, a figure of unwavering integrity and gentle strength. He projected the image of a devoted family man, both on and off the screen, often casting his own kids in his shows and talking constantly about the importance of family values. This was the Michael Landon the public fell in love with, a man who seemed to live the very ideals his shows championed, and yet, even when he was one of the most famous men in the world, there were shadows at the edges of this perfect picture. There were rumors of a volatile temper on set, whispers of heavy drinking, and then came the very public, very scandalous end of his nearly 20-year marriage to his second wife, Lynn No. It just didn't add up. Could the man who played Charles Ingalls, the ultimate symbol of fatherhood and faithfulness, really be the same man who left his wife for the set's makeup artist, a woman 2 decades younger than him? Could the creative genius who brought stories of love and forgiveness to millions be a man wrestling with such huge flaws of his own? The public was left to wonder, caught somewhere between the beloved TV icon and the sensational tabloid headlines. For decades, the full truth was hidden, protected by family loyalty and the simple passage of time. Until Cheryl Landon Wilson, his eldest daughter, decided it was time to fulfill a promise she made to her father on his deathbed. In her deeply personal memoir, I Promised My Dad, and in interviews, Cheryl offered up the missing pieces of the puzzle. She wasn't some outsider or a bitter co-star, she was the child who grew up at the very center of his world, the one who felt both his incredible love and the painful fallout from his choices. Her story doesn't try to tear down a legend. It tries to humanize him, confirming that behind the saintly television persona was a man who was brilliant, loving, and generous, but also deeply wounded and profoundly imperfect. Her story is the key that finally unlocks the complex truth of Michael Landon. To understand the man Michael Landon became, you have to start with the boy he was, Eugene Maurice Orowitz, born on Halloween in 1936. His childhood in Collingswood, New Jersey, was the polar opposite of the wholesome, loving world he would later create on TV. It was a pressure cooker of religious conflict and deep psychological pain. His father, Eli, was Jewish, and his mother, Peggy, was an Irish Catholic. In their mostly Protestant town, the family stuck out, and young Eugene faced cruel, anti-Semitic bullying from his classmates. He'd come home bruised after being called a Christ killer, a pain that made him feel like a perpetual outsider, but the torment he faced outside was nothing compared to the terror inside his own home. His mother, Peggy, was a deeply troubled woman, who even her own family described as mentally unstable and abusive. She was prone to fits of rage and, most terrifyingly, repeated suicide attempts, which she often staged right in front of her young son. In one awful incident during a family vacation, Peggy calmly walked into the ocean to drown herself. It was a young Eugene who had to rescue her, pulling her back to shore, only for her to pretend like nothing had happened just moments later. The psychological weight on that child was just immense. The stress caused him to have a chronic bedwetting problem that lasted well into his teens. Peggy's reaction wasn't compassion, it was cruel punishment. She would hang his soiled sheets from his bedroom window for the whole neighborhood and all his classmates to see. It was a daily ritual of public humiliation that forced a teenage Eugene to literally race home from school to hide the evidence of his shame. He later used this exact, painful memory in his semi-autobiographical TV movie, The Loneliest Runner. You really can't overstate how much this upbringing forged the man he became. His desperate need for control, his fierce desire to create a perfect, loving family, and his soft spot for the underdog, it all traces back to the chaos and cruelty of his youth. As his daughter Jennifer would later say, none of the things he experienced was ever apparent in the way he parented. He was all about turning things around. That's why he liked underdogs and identified with them. His first escape was athletics. He became a champion javelin thrower, even setting a national high school record in 1954 and getting a scholarship to USC. But a bad shoulder injury destroyed his Olympic dreams and, in a twist of fate, pushed him toward acting. He got rid of the name Eugene Orowitz, picking Michael Landon from a phone book. It was a symbolic rebirth, a way to create a new identity far away from the painful memories of Collingswood. His big break came in the 1957 cult classic I Was a Teenage Werewolf, but it was his role as the hot-headed, charming, and loyal Little Joe Cartwright in Bonanza that made him a superstar. For 14 years, America watched him grow up on the Ponderosa, and that good guy image started to stick. He was handsome, charismatic, and a core member of America's favorite TV family. The public was falling in love with a carefully built persona, while the real man, the survivor of an unthinkable childhood, was hiding just beneath the surface. As his fame exploded with Bonanza, Michael Landon set out to build the one thing he was never given, a stable, loving family. After a brief first marriage ended, he met an actress and model named Marjorie Lynn No, who went by Lynn. According to the story they both told their daughter Cheryl, their connection was instant and magnetic. Their eyes met on the set of Bonanza, and as Landon later put it, he knew in that exact moment he had to marry her. They were married in 1963, and for a while, their life looked like a Hollywood fairy tale. Landon jumped into the role of father. Lynn had a young daughter, Cheryl, from a previous relationship, and Landon instantly embraced her as his own. He was never able to formally adopt her because her biological father objected, but in every other way that mattered, he became her dad. Cheryl's stories from these early years are glowing. She remembers how he came into her life when she was about 7 and completely transformed it, becoming her rock. He was the fun, present father she had always wanted. She and Michael went on to have 4 more children together, Leslie, Michael Jr., Shauna, and Christopher. They created a big, blended family that became a huge part of Landon's public image. They looked like the perfect family, even appearing together in a series of wholesome Kodak television commercials in the 1970s. Their sprawling mansion in Beverly Hills was a playground, a place filled with the kind of laughter and chaos that Landon himself never had as a child. His daughter Jennifer, from his third marriage, would later describe his parenting as magical. She recalled a time he dyed the snow pink with strawberry quick so the kids could eat it with spoons. He was determined to give his children a sense of wonder and stability. His son, Chris, remembered him as pure joy and fun, a father who basically became a kid himself right alongside them. This was Landon's life mission, to build a perfect family that could act as a fortress against the ghosts of his own past. For Cheryl, these were perfect years. He was the dad who was always so present, who would just watch her jump in the pool for an hour straight, making her feel seen and cherished. This intense love and attention from a man who was a massive TV star was intoxicating. The Landon family, as the World saw them, and as his kids experienced them in those days, was the fulfillment of his life's work. He wasn't just playing a family man on TV, he was directing, producing, and starring in his own real-life version. He had the beautiful wife, the many children, the huge career. From the outside, and even from the inside for a while, it seemed he had successfully beaten his demons and built the perfect life he always dreamed of. But the foundation of that perfect life, built on such a broken past, was about to be tested in the most dramatic way possible. The perfect image of the Landon family, and the deep bond between Michael and his daughter Cheryl, was sealed forever by a horrible tragedy in 1973. At just 19 years old, while a student at the University of Arizona, Cheryl was in a catastrophic car accident. The small Volkswagen she was in with 4 friends was hit by a speeding car. Cheryl was the only survivor. She was left with devastating injuries, a broken neck, broken ribs. And she fell into a deep coma. The doctors in Tucson offered almost no hope. They tried to convince Michael Landon that his daughter was essentially gone and probably wouldn't make it through the night. But Landon absolutely refused to accept it. He flew immediately to her bedside and started a non-stop vigil, refusing to leave her. For days, as Cheryl lay unconscious, he just sat there, talking to her, pleading with her, coaching her to fight her way back. He made a pact with God right there in that hospital room, promising that if Cheryl lived, he would dedicate his work to creating something meaningful that would help people. Incredibly, after 3 days, Cheryl came out of the coma. The very first thing she did was repeat the words her father had been saying to her, proof that on some level, his voice had broken through the darkness. This became the defining moment in their relationship. For Cheryl, her father wasn't just the famous actor who married her mom anymore. He was her literal savior. In her eyes, his unwavering love and sheer force of will had pulled her back from the brink of death. The accident also changed Landon forever. According to Cheryl, he had just started working on Little House on the Prairie when the accident happened, and it was the promise he made at her bedside that injected his work with a much deeper spiritual message from that point on. Many believe this is where the seed for his later series, Highway to Heaven, was planted. The aftermath of the accident brought its own battles. The physical recovery was long and painful, requiring tons of surgeries. For years, Cheryl struggled with excruciating chronic pain, which eventually led to a dependency on painkillers, a battle she's been very open about. Throughout that incredibly difficult period of addiction and rehab, her father's support was her anchor. Their bond, forged in trauma and reinforced by love, seemed unbreakable. He was her hero, the man who gave her a fairy tale childhood and then literally saved her life. This powerful connection is key to understanding just how deep the pain would be when the man she idolized made a decision that would shatter the very family he had worked so hard to create. By the mid-1970s, Michael Landon wasn't just a TV star, he was an empire. On Little House on the Prairie, he was the executive producer, a frequent writer, and the show's main director, on top of being the lead actor. He was in total control, shaping the show's wholesome, family-first narrative every single week. On screen, he was Charles Ingalls, America's favorite pa, a man with unshakable morals, completely devoted to his wife, Caroline. But off-screen, Landon was starting to live a very different story, one that created a shocking and painful gap between his public image and his private life. The person who changed everything was Cindy Clerico. She was just 18 years old, working as a stand-in for one of the child actors, and more than 20 years younger than Landon. According to cast members like Karen Grassel, who played his on-screen wife, Ma Ingalls, Landon's behavior on set started to change. He began making weird comments, talking about his revived libido, and praising Pollen for older men. Soon enough, everyone on set knew the real reason for his new energy. He was having an affair with the teenage stand-in. Grassel remembered that Landon and Clerico would go off by themselves, talking for long periods. The affair quickly became an open secret, making the atmosphere on the set of the ultimate family show incredibly awkward. Melissa Gilbert, who played his daughter Laura and truly saw Landon as a father figure, was deeply shaken by it and put in a horribly uncomfortable position. His own daughter, Cheryl, also saw the change in her father. She recalled him once angrily telling her that her mother was behaving so strangely, when Cheryl knew it was he who was acting strange, trying to shift the blame for what he was doing. He was caught up in living a lie, she wrote. The man who demanded honestly from others was dealing in deceit. The affair, of course, led to the implosion of his 19-year marriage to Lynn No. The divorce was bitter and painfully public, a complete reversal of the loving image the Landon family had sold to the world for so long. The press had a field day with the scandal. America's family man was leaving his wife for a much younger woman he met at work. The hypocrisy was impossible to ignore, and Landon's image took a major hit. He even lost big endorsement deals, like his famous Kodak ads, because companies weren't so sure he could represent family values anymore. This is where Cheryl's confirmation of the story is so important. She validates the old rumors about the affair and the incredible pain it caused. She doesn't hide from the hurt and betrayal her family, especially her mother, went through. But she also adds a layer of complexity the tabloids never bothered with. She confirms what her father himself always insisted: the affair with Cindy wasn't the only reason for the divorce. Landon always maintained that his marriage to Lynn had been falling apart for years because of deep, unfixable differences. You don't dissolve a relationship to go to bed with someone 20 years younger, Landon told a magazine in 1985. You have to have major differences. Lynn and I fought a lot. We became different people. Cheryl's account backs up this more nuanced truth. It wasn't just a simple midlife crisis. It was the messy, painful unraveling of a long-term relationship, made 100 times worse by a scandalous affair that played out in the public eye. The perfect family fortress he had tried so hard to build had crumbled. The divorce from Lynn No in 1982 was a bomb going off in Michael Landon's life, sending shockwaves through his family and his public image. Lynn, who had been right there with him during his rise to superstardom, was left feeling betrayed and publicly humiliated. She largely retreated from public life to focus on her kids. For the children, especially the older ones like Cheryl, it was a time of immense pain and confusion. The man they looked up to as a pillar of integrity had just ripped their family apart. Landon married Cindy Clerico in 1983, and they quickly started a new family, welcoming a daughter, Jennifer, and a son, Sean. But this new beginning didn't magically heal the wounds of the old one. There were periods of distance and conflict. Cheryl's memoir touches on these tough family dynamics, including disagreements that later came up over his will, confirming that the Landons were like any other family, with internal struggles hidden from the cameras. But what also comes through in Cheryl's story is the powerful, if complicated, bond she still shared with her father. Despite the deep hurt the divorce caused, their relationship survived. They managed to navigate the storm of betrayal and forgiveness, and eventually found their way back to each other. That they could reconcile says everything about the depth of their connection. It wasn't a simple, fairy tale love, it was resilient and deeply human, strong enough to survive a massive strain. On the set of his show, you could feel the tension. Karen Grassel, Mott Ingalls, revealed that after she had a pay dispute with Landon, who was also her boss, he grew cold and would make crude, misogynistic jokes around her, especially during their intimate scenes filmed in the tiny bedroom set. She described feeling trapped and humiliated, unable to speak up in the male-dominated world of a 1970s TV set. This confirms that the control Landon craved, born from his chaotic childhood, could show up as kindness and generosity, but it could also turn into a punishing and intimidating force when he felt challenged. It paints a picture of a man who was both a gifted leader and, at times, a very difficult boss. The fallout from the affair and divorce forced the world to see a different Michael Landon. It was a messy, uncomfortable, and deeply human story of failure and new beginnings. He had built a new family, but the pieces of the old one were still there, a complex tangle of love, resentment, and, eventually, forgiveness. It was through this painful process that the myth of the perfect family man was finally torn down, leaving behind the much more complicated truth of the man himself, a truth that his daughter Cheryl would ultimately be the one to share with the world. Before we get to the final, heartbreaking chapter of Michael Landon's life and the promise his daughter made to him on his deathbed, take a moment to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into Hollywood's most compelling stories. In the spring of 1991, at just 54 years old, Michael Landon started suffering from a severe headache while on a ski trip in Utah. Soon after, he received a swift and brutal diagnosis: inoperable cancer of the pancreas and liver. It was a death sentence, a shocking blow to the seemingly invincible TV star. In true Landon fashion, he decided to face the battle head-on and on his own terms. He called a press conference at his Malibu ranch to announce his illness, mostly to get ahead of the tabloid rumors he hated so much. Just a month later, in what would be his final TV appearance, he sat down with his old friend Johnny Carson on The Tonight Show. Though he was visibly thin and weak, his spirit was as strong as ever. He faced the tragic situation with humor and raw honesty, joking with Carson and blasting the tabloids for their cruel headlines. In one powerful moment, he called out a tabloid headline that read, "4 weeks left," calling that kind of sensationalism the cancer in our society. He promised to fight the disease with everything he had, telling the audience that a positive attitude was half the battle, and asked his fans to pray for him. It was an incredibly brave and moving final performance. Behind the scenes, the diagnosis sped up the healing within his family. All 9 of his children rallied around him. It was during these last, precious months that the promise at the heart of his daughter's story was made. At his deathbed, Cheryl promised her father that she would protect his name and tell his story the right way, a story not just of his victories, but of his struggles, his flaws, and his immense capacity for love. It was a promise to show the world the whole man, not just the polished icon. On July 1, 1991, only 3 months after his diagnosis, Michael Landon passed away with his wife Cindy by his side. His death taught his children one final lesson. His daughter Leslie reflected years later that her father, who was always taking care of everyone else, had likely neglected his own health in the process. In his will, Landon took steps to prevent fighting among his heirs, leaving a videotaped message declaring that anyone who contested it would be disinherited. He behind a legacy of beloved TV shows, but for his children, the legacy was far more personal, a father who, for all his flaws, loved them fiercely. In the end, Michael Landon's daughter, Cheryl, kept her promise. Her candid story confirms what many people secretly suspected: the man behind Charles Ingalls was neither the perfect saint from TV nor the simple villain from the tabloids. He was a man profoundly shaped by a childhood of incredible trauma, who spent his entire life trying to build the loving, stable world he never had. His work was his therapy, an attempt to put on screen the ideals of family and forgiveness that he struggled to hold on to in his own turbulent life. Cheryl's portrait confirms his incredible generosity and his deep, unconditional love, especially for his kids. It also bravely confirms his flaws, his infidelity, his intense need for control, and the pain his choices caused his family. We always thought the perfect image was too good to be true, and Cheryl Landon Wilson confirms it was. But she replaces the simple myth not with a takedown, but with a complex, compassionate, and much more powerful truth. Michael Landon wasn't a saint from a prairie heaven. He was a deeply flawed, deeply loving, and profoundly human father. And thanks to his daughter's courage, we can finally appreciate the full story of the man, not just the legend.